Okay, I think we're live. And I know I promised to just be one more video, but I think this is going to be the penultimate video in the Quran series. So I'm just going to do this very short surah, the Dawn, or Al Falaq, which is the next to last surah in the Quran, and it's part of something called Al Muwahidat. As you can see, I'm not a native Arabic speaker, uh, but these are verses of refuge. That's Al Falaq and Al Nas, which are the two final surahs in the Quran. And according to Muhammad, these were the best surahs to recite if you were seeking help from Allah. And the Dawn is interesting because it begins by saying say, and of course recitation is very important in Islam. Recitation and rote memorization more than actually understanding the meaning of these verses. And this is why Muslims take such pride in being hafiz and memorizing vast quantities of the Quran, even if they don't necessarily understand the language, they'll be able to recite it. This is something that Nabil Qureshi explored in his books, particularly his memoir, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. He would talk about how he had to memorize huge portions of the Quran, and his older sister as well. And he took pride in this, even though he didn't understand Arabic. He was from a Pakistani American family. But this is very important in Islam, and this is why one of the reasons the Quran is so highly prized. This idea of memorizing these verses, even if even if you don't understand the language, and even if the verses, once you actually decode them, don't make much sense. So it begins with the recitation: "Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of the Dawn, from the evil of what He has created." And the He in this case is a capital H, and it's referring to Allah. So in Islam, Allah, or the being Muslims presume to be God, creates evil. And this is the antithesis of the God of the Bible. Just like the God of the Quran creates temptation, the the God of the Quran creates evil. And in contrast to the Bible, where you're told that you shouldn't say that God tempts you, because God does not tempt people. More often than not, it's people who are looking for an excuse to give in to temptation, who say that, or who blame God for their own premeditated actions. Hi, Air Church. I'm glad you're here. So this is a huge contrast between the Quran and the Bible. You have a God in the Quran, a so-called God that creates temptation and he creates evil. And then you have to go to that God to seek refuge from evil. It's a bit of a contradiction. You're seeking refuge from the thing that your God created. So in verse 3, it says, "And from the evil of the utterly dark night when it comes, and from the evil of those who blow on knots." Now, this is another line that doesn't really lend itself to easy explanation, and it's not self-explanatory. You have to go to the hadith in order to understand what this means, those who blow on knots, because it sounds very bizarre. What's he talking about? And what he's referring to in this verse is incantations and sorcerers. So Muhammad believed, and according to that hadith, it says that if you call on Allah, He'll protect you from the evil eye, or incantations, or sorcery. And there are a couple of problems there are a couple of problems with this verse. One of the foremost being the fact that sorcery and wizardry are actually condemned in the Pentateuch, and you can find this if you go back to the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy. You have these things being condemned, and in fact, in Exodus 22, verse 18, it says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." But the problem for Muslims is that these things are condemned in the same chapter where other things that Muslims endorse and that Muhammad endorsed are likewise condemned. So it says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." So look at what else. Look at what else is explained. So after that, it says, "Whoever lieth with a beast shall surely be put to death." So that's not something that Muslims, and particularly countries ruled by Sharia law, that's not something that they practice. So again, it's selective, it's cherry picking certain things from the Bible, just like the in Islam, eating pork is forbidden. And when you ask Muslims why this is, they'll say, "Oh, it's in the Quran because this was the law of Moses." But the law of Moses also condemned eating camels. And what does Muhammad say? He encourages and he praises eating camels because camel meat was very popular in that part of the Middle East. It's true, Mosaic law distinguished the people of God from neighboring tribes, but strangers also strangers were who were part of. This is particularly true during the Exodus. Strangers, people that came with the 12 tribes of Israel, um, they uh, and they were considered part of the nation. They were um, they were how do I describe this? They they weren't Gentiles or non-Jews were not forced to observe Mosaic law, and this is something that's emphasized. Uh, yeah, bound by the laws, but this is something that's emphasized particularly in the church epistles, the Pauline epistles, um, particularly Galatians, and in other and in the book of Acts. This is a dispute where the apostles are challenged by by members of the church, leaders, elders in the church in Jerusalem, who challenge them about this question, whether Gentiles are going to be forced to observe Mosaic law. In other words, would they have to become Jews in order to worship Christ and belong to the church? And that was the custom. You became, in order to worship Jehovah, you had to become a proselyte. So you basically had to become Jewish. And this was the dispute in the book of Acts, where you see the foundation of the church and the gospel being sent to Gentiles, whether or not they would have to become Jewish in order to belong to the church, which was comprised mostly or almost exclusively at the time of Jewish believers in Christ. So this was the main point of contention. And then as the church developed, you had people called Judaizers who were trying to impose the Mosaic covenant, the old covenant onto the church. Yeah, yeah. So see, that's the problem with Islam. It's not even that he wants to return to the old covenant. He takes little, because he doesn't understand the Bible and he doesn't understand the Torah. he takes he selectively takes certain portions of that and applies it in the Quran in order to legitimize his own weird syncretic belief system. So it's not even um, as if he wants people to observe the old covenant. He just takes parts of the Torah selectively and applies it, but other parts he completely disregards, like the idea of eating camel meat. He says that's perfectly fine, and then he says that the law was a curse to the Jews, which is a complete misunderstanding, and it's an illustration that Muhammad didn't understand the Bible, and he didn't understand the Abrahamic covenant or the Mosaic covenant. He didn't understand any of this, and he didn't understand God's relationship with Israel and God's relationship with the rest of the world. So he basically saw the law as a curse when it's obviously not. I mean, Psalm 119, David, the psalmist, waxes poetically about how much he loves the law. And he says, I delight in the law. He says that, I forget how many times, but he says, I delight in your law, like half a dozen or more times in that one psalm, which is the longest psalm in the Bible. So obviously the law was not a curse. The curse was people who promised to live by the law because they were fallible, and they were fallible people who weren't capable of doing that. That was why Jesus had to. I mean, that was the whole point of the first Advent and Jesus's crucifixion and his life. He was the only person capable of living the law, but promising to live by the law was a curse. And in Nehemiah, when Israel is regathered, at least a remnant of it is gathered, and they promise to live by the law, it says that they were bound by a curse. But the curse wasn't the law itself. The law was something created by God. The curse was trying to live by the law, or trying to seek this relationship with God by living by agreeing to do something that was impossible. But anyway, that's just a bit of a tangent. I just wanted to point out that it condemns wizardry, yes, but it also condemns bestiality. He that sacrificeth unto any god save unto the Lord, capital Lord, only he shall be utterly destroyed. So Islam forsakes that. What else? Thou shalt not vex a stranger nor oppress him, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Islam ignores that as well. Lie with the gods, nor curse the ruler of thy people. So this, among other things, the camel eating camel meat, there are all sorts of ways in which Islam transgresses against the law, the Mosaic covenant. So this idea that this surah condemns wizard divination or sorcery. I mean, it's fine, but it ignores the fact that Islam countenances all of these other things that God condemned. So in the final verse, verse 5, it says, "And from the evil of the envious, when he envies." Like you said, the Quran is very repetitive, but this is also kind of ironic when you consider how covetous Muhammad was. And that's another way that Muhammad was not a godly person and was certainly not a prophet, his covetousness. Anyway, that is Surah 113. It's the penultimate surah and the final surah, which is also one of the verses of refuge, is called the Men, or Al-Nas. And I'll be doing that. And there's a final prayer, an Islamic prayer, which I'll be analyzing in my hopefully my last video in this series. So I will see you all tomorrow.